Well, I just want to say, when we talk about these issues, there's a lot of emotions going on because, they cut to the core of our worldview often.
Yep.
And I think this is true no matter what side of the spectrum you are on. Are you talking with? The problem is that you often can't change someone's opinion immediately. I mean, you have to plant a seed of doubt in their mind, and that it has to grow in their pace. I mean, if they're a fence sitter, maybe you can push them over, but I don't think that you can just throw them over the fence if they're unwilling to change their mind themselves.
Yeah.
And so the reason I bring this up is because we have different worldviews, and they're. I mean, I want to try to be as gracious and nice and respectful as possible, but there's a chance when we have these serious discussions that it's gonna get emotional for either of us.
No, I've done this for 14 years. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, yeah, great. So if I say anything that that gets you emotional or upset, so please, I apologize in advance. That's not my intention.
Yeah, no worries. Not mine either. So let's get started.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay. One final disclaimer. I call from Sweden, so I don't know if there's some kind of lag when we talk or not. I assume there isn't, but if there is, and you want to interrupt me, please understand that I might, not hear it immediately, but I will stop talking immediately if you want me to.
Sure. Worst case, I'll put you on hold, and you'll hear a difference in the audio, and then I'll talk, and then you come back. But
all right. Before I begin this discussion, I'd just like you to answer 2 questions about near-death experiences, if that's okay for the both of you.
Questions about what?
Near-death experiences.
Oh, near-death experiences. Okay.
Yeah, all right. The first, I think it was 5 years ago that I saw some clip of you doing a show with another caller, and he called about, this was before the AWARE study was published, and you went kind of back and forth, and it ended with kind of a stalemate.
What study?
The AWARE study by Sam Parnia et al.
I'm not familiar with it.
Nor am I.
Oh, okay. They had a kind of a study of near-death experiences in 25 different hospitals in the United States and in Europe.
Oh,
and,
I may be familiar with the study. I just may not be familiar with it by name, but.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that he asked you about near-death experiences and what you think would constitute evidence of consciousness existing outside the brain, and you kept insisting, I don't know. I just want to ask you, do you still hold on to that kind of viewpoint?
Yes. I don't know how you would demonstrate conscious absent a body.
All right. And the second question, and then feel free to answer as well. Do you think that anything about the near-death experience constitutes at least some suggestive evidence that there's something supernatural going on? Or do you think that it's evident that promissory materialism will eventually save the day?
I don't know of any serious evidence for some sort of idea that you would be dead and then come back to life. It seems to me, my understanding, that it's all about odd brain states that occur because of the unusual circumstances of the person, and when they come back, they may interpret it a certain way, and often they're interpreting it based on the ambient religion of their culture.
But it's worse than that, to address your actual question, because your question was, do you think there's evidence that supports the notion of supernatural? No. It's worse than that, because I don't know how anyone could ever say this is evidence for the supernatural, because if you look at it honestly, what you really have is, here is something for which we do not have a natural explanation. That in and of itself can never mean that a supernatural explanation is likely or possible or probable until somebody makes some demonstration of the supernatural, and I have no idea how they would do that, because how do you determine that something is in fact not natural?
Yeah, it's a giant leap.
Yeah, just one final brief question. When you mean supernatural, do you mean it in contrast to the philosophical side of naturalism?
I mean that something is in fact not, that the source of something is in fact not a function of the natural world. Because I don't even have any reason to think that there is in fact anything other than the natural world.
It's kind of awkward to be defining this because we're the ones that are kind of skeptical of the claim. It's like if if you want to define the supernatural, we can start from there. That would be helpful. But I think we're the wrong people to define supernatural.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. By something being natural, do you kind of equate it with materialism or physicalism?
Yes.
All right.
I am not a philosophical naturalist materialist in that I do not assert that the natural world is in fact all that exists. I'm a methodological naturalist, which means the natural world is all that I know to exist, and if there's something beyond that, somebody would need to demonstrate it.
All right. Now I'm going to say something controversial, and that you're probably going to disagree with, but
probably.
Yeah. What I think you're implicitly, whether you know it or not, is you're kind of conceding that you are a fundamentalist.
I'm conceding that I'm what?
I'm sorry. 2 seconds. I'm just going to check that you're a fundamentalist, a term that philosopher Neil Grossman coined to refer to those who believe that materialism is a necessary truth, not amenable to empirical evidence, and to characterize a person whose attitude towards materialism is the same as the fundamentalist attitude toward his or her religion.
No.
In each case, the attitude is one of unwavering...
No, we're sort of asking for the evidence that...
I am a skeptic, which means that I'm not going to believe something until there's sufficient evidence for it. The fact that I don't know what evidence might be necessary to demonstrate a particular case isn't my problem, just like it's not a fault of evolution that it doesn't explain the origins of life. That's outside the scope of it. So if there is in fact evidence that would reasonably lead someone to conclude that there is something beyond the natural world, I'm perfectly open to that. It's just I've never seen it, and I don't know how it could be presented. But if you can do it, do it.
Yeah, but the problem is that you're not treating materialism as a falsifiable hypothesis. If you can't make falsifiable predictions by it.
Wait, I am treating materialism as a falsifiable hypothesis. Well, actually, when we're talking about this, it's not really a sort of hypothesis. The way to show that philosophical materialism and philosophical naturalism is false is to demonstrate that there's something other than the natural world. It is a falsifiable proposition at least in a hypothetical sense, because if someone can demonstrate that there's something beyond the natural world, then philosophical naturalism has in fact been falsified. Now, whether or not it is actually possible to demonstrate this is a separate issue. It's not the fault.
Does this sound like fundamentalism to you?
It's not the fault. I'm not asserting, and I specifically just said this, I'm not asserting the natural world is all there is. I'm saying that I have no reason to think there's anything beyond the natural world. And anytime anybody has tried to present some reason to think there's something beyond the natural world, it has been fallacious.
Usually an argument from ignorance or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I'm just saying if you don't have
a
falsifiable prediction about materialism.
What do you mean? What do you mean if you don't have a falsifiable prediction about materialism? Even if I had
materialism could be.
Even if materialism wasn't falsifiable, that tells me nothing about whether or not there's good reason to believe that there's something beyond the natural world.
Can I give an example of something that might falsify it?
Sure.
He gave you one just a minute ago. Demonstrate the supernatural.
Yeah, but he didn't give a concrete example of what it would be.
That's not my job. If you're going to define supernatural and make an argument for it, that's your job, not mine. That would be me. If I tried to give you my definition of supernatural, and then that would be straw manning it. Tell me what. We've been on the phone for I don't know how many minutes now, and you're trying to build up to something. Would you just present your case for something supernatural? And then we can actually discuss that rather than this philosophical definition or this label that we're going to put on. I don't give a shit about labels.
All right, I'm sorry I upset you. Okay, we'll go with an example then. For instance, when you have a near-death experience, you often have, for instance, out-of-body experiences, as I'm sure you're aware.
Okay,
Now,
so one of the things right now, saying you have an out-of-body experience, that's not necessarily true. You have an experience that you describe as being out of your body. That doesn't mean you were out of your body.
Yeah, I can see that point, but I was trying to get somewhere.
I'm just look.
Yeah.
If we're gonna do this, and you're going to be talking about definitions of things, I would just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So yes, I'm aware of the fact that people who have these reported near-death experiences sometimes report that they feel they were out of their body. Okay, continue.
Yes. Yeah, all right. And for instance, Janice Holden in the 2009 book, The Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, for instance, she kind of compiled a lot of different near-death experiences, and she found that in 90% of all the cases, the observations they made about the external world during this out-of-body state was completely accurate. And in about 8 or so percent of cases, there was at least one error, and then there was some percent that was false.
Were they physically in the room?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
What were the observations?
Had experience or...
I mean, is it miraculous if somebody is in a room and they, are thought to be unconscious and they are aware of something that goes on in the room? Is that a miracle? Is that a demonstration of the supernatural?
Well, if there's, if they're experiencing cardiac arrest, I do think so, yeah.
Okay, I don't. And here's the problem. So first of all, I would need to know the nature of what these observations are, because there are a number of tests that we can do to demonstrate whether or not somebody is actually out of their body. To date, there has been no scientific test done that confirmed that someone was actually outside of their body. The sort of observations they make are the things that Don's talking about, is this is somebody who's in the room. Just because you're near death doesn't mean you can't still hear or experience things and other things. But let's say at the end of the day that what you're trying to say is completely accurate, that in many of these experiences, 90% of them, what they report to have observed during this experience is accurate. Let's just say that you're right. 90% of the time they report things that are accurate. What's the explanation for that?
Well, there are. I mean, I'm sure you understand that there are two major explanations. There's the physiological explanation, and then there's the survivalist interpretation of the phenomena.
Okay. There are a number of possible explanations for this. How do you tell which one is actually more plausible?
Well, first of all, are you familiar with what happens in the brain when you suffer a cardiac arrest?
Specific with a cardiac arrest? No. But I do know that in a number of dying circumstances, that the brain suffers a reduction in oxygen, and these are all things that are typical with hallucinations and whatever else. But at the end of the day, this is what I'm getting to. Let's say we didn't know anything about flawed brains, which we know lots about. We know lots about hallucinations. We know lots about brains on drugs. We know lots of things about brains that are starved of oxygen or not functioning properly. There's no way I could ever conclude that a damaged and or dying brain is going to give more accurate information than a healthy brain. But let's say we knew nothing about the brain, and all of a sudden 90% of people that were reporting these experiences had observations that were accurate. How could we possibly conclude that the best explanation for that is that they actually, in fact, left their body, came back to it, and reported what they experienced when they were out of their body?
I mean, that is. I mean, if you disregard your ideological commitment to materialism, that is the prima facie interpretation of this.
No, it's not. No, it's not. This is the problem: is I don't have to have any attachment to materialism at all. I am completely open to someone demonstrating that they can leave their body. I'm asking, how could you demonstrate that the best explanation is that they actually left their body? Because all you've done so far is accused me of essentially being opposed to the idea to the point where I won't consider it, and that this is the prima facie explanation. No, that is an argument from ignorance. There is no way to conclude that the best explanation is that they left their body until you actually make a demonstration that this is the best explanation. You don't, because what you're really doing is saying, we don't have any natural explanations for this, when actually I think we have loads of natural explanations for it. But even if we have, I've given you everything. I've said, let's assume that this is correct. Let's assume that we know nothing about the brain and could come up with no plausible natural explanation. That still doesn't mean we have sufficient warrant to conclude a supernatural explanation, and I'm asking what it would take to demonstrate that the best explanation is supernatural.
Well, for instance, as you said, we do have some knowledge about what happens when the brain shuts down and it is compromised and damaged, right?
I don't know why we're going here. I just conceded everything you could possibly want and asked a simple question. How can you demonstrate?
I was gonna get to the answer.
You better get to the answer, because I've asked this repeatedly, and then you keep coming back and doing a tap dance. I've conceded everything. All I'm asking, how do you conclude that a supernatural explanation is in fact the best one?
I'm a little worried. Okay. Because when the brain shuts down, you would expect no experience whatsoever. And yes.
No. Why would you expect that? And by the way, I'll go ahead and concede this too. Let's say that we would in fact expect no experience whatsoever as the brain begins to shut down, which is a more accurate description of the near-death experience. Let's assume that you're correct. How then does the presence of some experience, which by the way is only reported after the fact and can't be demonstrated to be concurrent, you can't demonstrate that your brain is not inventing an explanation for the period that it was shut down, but let's say we had no explanation, no nothing. How do you determine that a supernatural explanation is the best explanation?
Because they experienced things while the brain was shut down that they shouldn't even have been able to experience.
No, wrong, false, completely bizarrely false. I just got done explaining. You're saying they experienced something when the brain should be shut down. You don't know that. You have no way to demonstrate that they experienced something during that time. You just have a way, you can just demonstrate that after the fact, they had the experience of thinking that they had that during that time. This is the problem when you get to brain stuff. But even if we expected nothing to happen as the brain was going down, and even if you could demonstrate that in fact there was something happening, that there was actual concurrent experience, which couldn't be made up afterwards, how do you determine, for the last time I'm asking this, how do you determine that the best, the most probable, the most reasonable explanation is that there has to be something supernatural involved?
All right, let's take the example from the AWARE study that they found. Okay, this was a person who was 3 to 5 minutes of cardiac arrest. And
I'm asking a question.
He's asking a methodological question.
Yes. Presenting another study is just going to get me to concede yet another point, because you're missing the fine point. How could one possibly demonstrate the supernatural?
By demonstrating that they were out of the body? I'm not really sure what you're getting at here.
How do you know that whatever they're experiencing isn't natural? Do we know and understand everything about the natural world?
No.
Okay. So it may be possible that there's a natural explanation.
And we just don't know it.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Maybe possible.
Hang on. So we know that it is at least possible that there's a natural explanation, because we are in agreement that there is a natural world, right? And that there are things about it we don't know.
Yes, of course. That's a trivial point that they have points. Yeah.
Sure. But we don't know that it's possible that there's a supernatural explanation, because we have no evidence for the supernatural. You don't get to say that the best explanation is something for which we have no understanding. We explain things in terms of other things that we already understand. So you would need to demonstrate that there is in fact something beyond the natural world, and that it can in fact do this thing and serve as an explanation for this phenomena. And then you would need to demonstrate that the phenomena occurs, and then you would need to demonstrate a causal link between that supernatural cause and the phenomena, and none of these studies do any of it. It is essentially something that, and I've studied this for years, I have no idea how you could begin to demonstrate the supernatural.
Yeah, I mean, every time I try to explain myself, it feels like you're interrupting me and saying the same thing all over again, which I've already heard. So I don't know if I can speak freely.
You know why I've interrupted you? Because I've asked this question probably 4 or 5 times now, and you have yet to get anything near a methodology to demonstrate the supernatural. Instead, you want to go to another study. There's no study on the planet that has the methodology to determine supernatural causation.
No, but that gets back to the whole fundamentalist point.
No. Oh my God!
It's because it's a failure.
Yeah, no, but I mean, you're
Now you're back.
constitute evidence.
I'm asking you to demonstrate the truth of your proposition and the methodology by which you can reach it. And instead of doing that, you are simply saying, you're back to being a fundamentalist materialist.
Conspiracy
You just
theories.
won't accept this.
Yeah.
I'm asking you, what is the methodology? And I said I was asking for the last time, but this is literally the last time. What methodology can you provide that would demonstrate supernatural causation?
All right, if I had a cardiac arrest right now, and I flew over to you and saw everything that was in your room right now, would you consider that as evidence for the supernatural?
No, and that's also not a methodology. Okay. That's a question about actual evidence and how to interpret it. So goodbye. I would be happy to consider that case if in fact you were to suffer cardiac arrest at your house right now and describe what boots I'm wearing. Oh, actually, there's pictures of this. That wouldn't be. If you were actually able to come over here and if I open my wallet under the table and you were able to tell me exactly how much money's in my wallet, that would be impressive. That would be cool. That would be the sort of thing that I, as a mentalist, and other people would say, I would like to learn how to do that. And that would begin.
Good magic trick, right?
That would begin an exploration into the possible ways that this could be achieved. Now, there may be natural ways that it could be achieved. Maybe you're in cahoots with Don. Maybe Don counted the money in my wallet while I wasn't looking, and he told you. But even if I could find no natural explanation, the fact that it might seem intuitive to people that we must then think that you actually left your body and came here does not mean that that's actually what happened. That proposition needs evidence for it. And it would have to be more than, because what you're doing in all of these situations is what Don pointed out 20 minutes ago, or however long ago. It's an argument from ignorance fallacy. It is essentially, well, technically it's not an argument from ignorance fallacy because that would involve you saying this is believable because it hasn't been proved wrong. Instead, it's more like an argument from incredulity where you're saying, I have no better explanation, so I'm going to go with this one. But that is known to be fallacious and problematic. It's like saying, we don't understand lightning, therefore that demonstrates that it must be Odin, Thor, Zeus. Zeus. We'll go with Zeus for lightning because I keep getting corrected on that. Although Thor is the god of lightning, so screw you. I've seen it. It's been in the movies. He was badass in Infinity War.
There you go.
But saying that we don't have a natural explanation, therefore we will go to a supernatural one, is fallacious. You have to demonstrate a way to determine that there is anything supernatural, which you haven't done. You're essentially, in a slightly more sophisticated way, doing the same thing that Mike Lacona did in our debate about the resurrection, where Mike takes everything that doesn't have a natural explanation currently and dumps it in a bucket and just calls it supernatural. And then he uses the fact that there's a bucket of things in which he dumps the supernatural. He uses that as justification to dump more things in there. Hey, we don't understand this, it must be supernatural, which means this thing that happened, which we don't have an explanation for, and we're not, or this thing that people say happened, like Jesus rising from the dead. We have no evidence that this actually happened. But what Mike did was he took all these things that we don't understand, puts it in a bucket, calls it supernatural, and then uses that bucket to say, look at all this evidence for the supernatural, let me swirl it around. Right. And now, when you hear a story, yeah, it is a bucket of shit. But now when you hear a story, hey, this guy rose from the dead, instead of doing the skeptical thing, which is to say, I don't believe that somebody rose from the dead under these circumstances that you're describing, you'll have to provide evidence for it. Now, he reaches over into the bucket of crap and says, look, here's all these other things. They're not any more implausible than this is. Therefore, this bucket of shit lends credence to this notion that the stories we're hearing are true.
And it's a big bucket, too.
And that's the key thing. Because when you talk about near-death experiences, you're talking about stories. Someone was dying. And now they're not dead. And now their brain has to make sense of what was happening while it was damaged, deprived of oxygen or blood, or shutting down, and in a weird state, or broken, whatever. And we invent stories all the time. I talked about this last week. We don't have to go through all this again. We lie to ourselves all the time. I think that's far more plausible that near-death experiences are cases of brains lying to themselves when they don't understand what was going on. Or, in some cases, as we've demonstrated, it's just people lying. We went to heaven and did this, and then they later on get caught and they acknowledge that they were lying. But I think what's happening here is you look around the world and you see these stories. Look, 90% of people are reporting stuff that's accurate. I don't have a natural explanation for it, therefore the explanation must be supernatural. That is false. Draw it out in a syllogism. It's false all day long. It's fallacious. It's nonsense. It's garbage. The correct position is the skeptical position, which is not one of a fundamental materialist, as you would want to say, but to say, I have no idea what the explanation is for near-death experiences. I don't. I'm willing to be convinced of any possible explanation were there to be sufficient evidence for it, supported by a proper methodology. Boom, done. And yet that never happens, as is evident by the fact that we had to ask over and over and over again, and all we get is more anecdotes. The plural of anecdote is not data, and data is not a methodology.